Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for choosing to spend your time with us today. The lights went off, and I can't see any of you, but I trust you're all still there. I know it hasn't quite warmed up yet outside, but I wonder if all the talk you're about to hear today about Kenora and Lake of the Woods might pull some of that summer cottage weather just a little bit closer for us. Before we get going this afternoon, it's important for the Jewish Heritage Centre of Western Canada to acknowledge that the province of Manitoba is located on the territories of Treaties 1 through 5 and on the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. We respect and honor the treaties and agreements that were made on these lands we share, and we remain committed to strengthening our relationships with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Harlan Abels, and I'm the president of the Jewish Heritage Centre of Western Canada, an organization that I've been extremely fortunate to be a part of for the better part of the last 4+ years. The Jewish Heritage Centre serves to develop, interpret, and disseminate information on the history and culture of Western Canadian Jewry, and to develop awareness of the history, moral, and ethical implications of the Holocaust and other human rights violations. We maintain a vast archive of physical and digital artifacts, documents, and photographs that reflect and preserve the history of our community. We provide programming throughout the year on a wide variety of topics. As well, we provide education on the Holocaust and anti-Semitism to thousands of Manitoban students and educators every year. The Marion and Ed Vicker Jewish Museum of Western Canada is a visually dynamic environment offering viewers in-depth information about topics and ideas integral to the understanding of our community, and the recently refurbished Freeman Family Foundation Holocaust Education Center displays artifacts donated by local survivors and their families, and it can be found just down the hall over this way. If you haven't had the chance to check out the space since renovations, I would highly recommend doing so. And if you're looking to get involved specifically with us or in the community, please feel free to reach out to either myself or to our executive director, Bel Dranevsky, and we'd be happy to find a place for you. This afternoon's program is one that I'm sure you'll all find extremely engaging. In school, we learn about World War II and the Holocaust and its atrocities, and although in Jewish geography there's only ever so many degrees of separation, I know at least for myself, it's always seemed like these events were exclusive to the other side of the planet. Little did I know, during the war, there was a German POW camp right near the Jewish community, and little did I know that community was almost in our own backyard in Lake of the Woods. Just like all of you here today, I'm beyond excited to listen to Mr. Braden Murray and Dr. Raysinger present their research on this subject in Kenora, Keinehorathe. I don't want to take too much of your time, so I just want to say thank you again for being here and continuing to show how strong our Jewish community is here in Winnipeg. And I'd like to pass this on to Dan Stone to continue this afternoon's proceedings. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dan Stone. I'm the chair of the Programs and Exhibits Committee, and it's been my pleasure to introduce the program. I've just driven through Kenora, stopped for lunches, suppers occasionally, driven around Kenora, but never really knew much about it, and except I thought it would be an interesting place to find out about. And when Ray suddenly said, hey, I've been involved there, and I found there's a Jewish community there that we'd like to talk about, the Programs and Exhibits Committee jumped at the chance. So now we have today's program with two people who are very well qualified to talk about it. The format is perhaps not quite usual. They're going to go back and forth. We can start with Braden Murray, who's the director of the Muse, Lake of the Woods Museum and Douglas Family Art Center, a position he has held since 2023. Previously, he served as curator of the Lake of the Woods Museum. Braden was born and raised in Fredericton, New Brunswick, but like many Maritimers before him, came west to seek his fortune. He found it in Kenora, where he lives with his wife Samantha and his daughter Hazel. He's going to start, but at a certain point he's going to turn it over to Dr. Raysinger, a retired family doctor, originally from St. Catharines, Ontario, who's practiced most of his 48 years in Winnipeg, with a year in Churchill and another year in Israel. Ray's a longtime cottage owner in the Kenora area, 42 years now, where he and his family spend summers and parts of other seasons. Ray has widespread interests beyond, well, all kinds of things. He did a presentation on the Polish-Jewish author Bruno Schulz at Limud last year, perhaps 2 years ago, and many other exciting interests. So the two of them will go back and forth. At the end of their back and forth, there'll be lots of time for questions and answers, and then we'll just end the program after that. So Braden and Ray, will you come up, please? And I'll turn the program over to the two of you.
So just before Ray gets into some of his research, I'm going to lay the context for Kenora, the north end of Lake of the Woods. Just very quickly, the north end of Lake of the Woods has been inhabited for thousands of years. I mean, we have evidence of inhabitation, seasonal, moving around in the north end of Lake of the Woods for literally thousands of years. But the number of people living there has been, frankly, quite small up until fairly recently. Really, the main driver of the population boom, and I'm sure some of you will be familiar with this as well, was the building of the railway in the 1870s and early 1880s. In fact, the population of Kenora in 1875 was 12 people, and the population in 1878 was 800. So the population grew fairly rapidly. In 1882 to 1884, for 2 glorious years, Rat Portage, which is what Kenora was formerly called, was part of Manitoba in the county of Varennes. So originally Rat Portage, Manitoba, there was some unpleasantness. Things went back and forth, and eventually the decision was Rat Portage would be part of Ontario. But with that all sorted out, by 1888 and 1889, the population at this point was growing again, 2,000, 3,000 people. There was a gold rush on Lake of the Woods through the late 1880s and 1890s, and the population was booming, and there was a great opportunity for people to come make their fortune in Rat Portage, and that is where I'll hand it off to Ray.
Thank you, Braden. I will say that I don't want him to fluster Braden, but he's a real mensch. That's the word for like a really special and decent guy. I went in not knowing him at all to the museum last summer early fall and proposed the idea of presenting myself on the Jewish community presence in Kenora, and he was extremely supportive. He said, "Hold on a second, Ray." He went out, he came back, and he had fax copies of the original titles of the land that led to the creation of the
Closer to the...
Oh, sorry. To the creation of the Kenora Synagogue. I had no idea there was a Kenora Synagogue. So I've been in the medicine business for close to 50 years, but I've never looked as colorful or as cool as this fellow. And we'll talk more about the provenance of that slide later if I have time. Okay, so is it incongruous to have a Jewish history of Kenora, Keinehorathe? No, of course not. There's as I said, quite a history, and I will tell you very quickly how this project began. It all began because of my wife, Barb. She's an ardent aquasizer, and she was friends with a lot of people in the pool, including a certain Rosalie Dater, who, when she heard that we had a cabin in Kenora for 43 years, she said, "Well, my great uncles went out to Kenora in 1920 or 21, and that piqued my curiosity to learn more about the presence of a Jewish community in Kenora. I had no idea. So I've been doing some oral and other research since then. Now, some of you who've been through Kenora know that the mascot, if you will, of Kenora is this giant husky, the muskie, the muskellunge. Camarno has its giant mosquito, Boissevain its giant turtle, and we have a fish. Now, I'm not going to go over too much history, but this is a historic plaque detailing exactly where the location of the first Hudson Bay post was in 1836. And right next to that sign indicating where the Husky the Muskie is the smiling Joey Katz. And I thought that was unintentional, Joey, but I thought that was worth keeping. Joey has spent his life more or less in Kenora and is living there to this day. Okay, so why Kenora, Keinehorathe? Some of you may know, well, I really like rhyming and etymology, and both of these words are neologisms. They're contractions from other words. For Kenora, it's from Ke, from Keewatin, No from Norman, where the Norman Dam now is, and Ra for Rat Portage. The proper indigenous name for Rat Portage is Waujushk Onigum. For Keinehorathe, again, many of you know this, but not all. Keina is German for no, Ayin is Hebrew for I, and Hara is Hebrew for evil. So with no evil eye is often said in a superstitious manner after something good happens and you don't want bad fortune to befall you. So there's Kenora, Keinehorathe. And there's a map of, a very detailed map in 1885 of the Lake of the Woods. All the light color is, of course, water, and the dark is the peninsulas and the islands. Lake of the Woods should have been called Lake of the Islands because there's 14,000 islands in that lake, at last count anyway. Now, who were the very first peoples? Well, I think Braden has mentioned there were the Anishinaabe, and actually I'm going to that slide there, and they have been in the area for 1,000 years, possibly a little more. They worked their way up from St. Lawrence and the Great Lakes to north of Superior and then westwards to the Lake of the Woods area. And also Lakota and Cree people were in this area also. Now, it may be hard for you. I don't expect you to read that, but there's a lot of purple prose in this article about Kenora from 110 or 115 years ago, where they're talking about it laying claim to preeminence unrivaled by any other spot in the Canadian West. And in this regards, it ranks among the outdoor places of the world, where the weary city dweller may find the desired cordial for the overworked brain and the unstrung nerves, and on and on and on. But I thought that was interesting, that I don't know how many people had discovered Kenora by that time, but there were certainly a lot of wealthy, a lot of them were Winnipeg crane barons and their friends, mostly exclusively WASP, actually, who built grand places on Coney Island, Lake of the Woods back 120 years ago. Okay, so a little more history. So who was the first Jewish person to come to this area? Well, you'd think it'd be the 1880s or 1890s, but no, it was Ezekiel Solomon. And again, my wife told me something about him. This fellow was born in Prussia, rose up in the fur trade after leaving New England, and came to Montreal, and eventually his business interests became directly related to the fur trade. He competed with the Northwest Company and subsequently the Hudson Bay Company, and he had 12 trading posts from Lake Nipigon to the origin of the Winnipeg River, which originates from Lake of the Woods, exactly where Kenora is now. It would be hard to believe that Ezekiel didn't come to the Kenora area to check out his most western trading post. Here's two voyageurs. 1976, a dear friend of mine is now departed, and we're on the Churchill River. Now, the Great Migration from Eastern Europe, as many of you know, from 1880 to 1920, 2 million people of Jewish origin emigrated from Europe in those years, mostly to North America, but also even South America, New Zealand, Australia, and Palestine. Now, why did they leave? Well, there was very, very few opportunities. They couldn't own land. Most of them couldn't go to university for higher education. There was forced conscription in the Tsar's army. And if you made it into the army, you often didn't come back. And there was pogroms in those years too, where entire villages were decimated or wiped out. So who were those people, the people who came over? Well, depending on your age, they were your grandparents or your great-grandparents. So if you're really young, they were your great-great-grandparents. And here's one of them, an early arrival, J.J. Schrag. I love this photo. It's from the Jewish Heritage Center archives. He became a bit of he was a leader in the very, very early phases of the Sherazadic synagogue. But more about the Schrag clan later. Now, actually, I was amazed because of the size of the, the screen. You can actually read these names. This is a list of the Jewish people who lived in Kenora in about 1940-41, and there was up to 75 souls, because this is the number in the family, and 25 more or less individuals, including Blatt, who had a well-known grocery store in Kenora. Lenitsky we'll talk about briefly, Izzy Katz, the Daters, who I'm going to profile, Gurwitch, the Donners, Winklers were there by that time, and other people who some of you will definitely be related to. So that's precisely what I'm going to be looking at. I didn't mention that I'm going to be profiling in more detail the following families: the Daters, the Schrags, the Katzes, and the Winklers. I'm taking, it would be way too much time to do more families than that, and I had a caveat that I wasn't including summer people. I'm just briefly touching on the history of BB Camp. It deserves its own separate history, frankly. And yeah, so the people had to live in Kenora for at least 5 years continuous, more or less, some exceptions. So what do these people do? Well, in the shtetls in Europe, they were limited to being tailors, cobblers, bakers, peddlers, but in Kenora, they had freedom, and their jobs often reflected the Kenora unique environment. They were fur traders and trappers, into blueberry sales, into logging. There were water taxi operators, and they played a big role in some of the developing the iconic restaurants and hotels in the Kenora area. They were lawyers, dentists, very active in the community organization, gold miners, there's an air pilot, a postmaster, town councilors in Kenora, and even the mayor. Now, the Daters, now that's quite a tribe. Now, this, I believe, is taken in Birds Hill, where the Daters settled initially. In the Birds Hill colony, I didn't know much about that, and maybe some of you do. It was a significant agricultural colony. There were 40-odd families at least there. It was funded by Baron Sveta Rothschild, and he funded many similar agricultural Jewish areas in Western Canada. So here's Moshe and Sarah Dater. They've come from Proskorov, Russia. There's another picture of them. And emigrated in the early aughts of the 20th century with sons Saul and Sam. They settled into Birds Hill, and they had 10 acres to farm on. They had 18 cattle, 20 chickens, 2 horses. It was quite the thing for them. But it's their older sister who emigrated actually to Manitoba before Moshe, Genendel, who I'm going to talk about, because she's the one who goes to Kenora. She also went by the names of Gertie or Katie. Now, her saga is one filled with triumph and tragedy. She ends up marrying a fellow Frank Ashton in Kenora, and he's a laborer, I believe, and they have a child, Frank Jr. When he's 3 years old, Ashton is killed in some kind of industrial accident, and she's left a widow. Later, she was running, by the way, a clothing store at that time. She then goes on to remarrying later in 1919 to Simon Gurvich. And I'm going to profile him very briefly because Simon came to Kenora as a laborer, and he enlisted for active duty in Europe. He was one of the first men from Kenora to enlist and serve in World War I in the trenches. He survived the terrible battles of Passchendaele, Vimy Ridge, poison mustard gas, only to sustain a serious bayonet wound in the thigh in hand-to-hand combat. He was hospitalized 2 months and sent back to the trenches. He returns to Kenora in 1919, only to be killed in a pulp load accident 3 years later. So she's doubly, Gurvich is doubly widowed. She's left with a 6-year-old and a 2-week-old, yes, because they made another baby. So she's on her own, but Saul and Sam from Birds Hill come to the rescue. They come out to Kenora ostensibly to help her. Eventually they establish their own businesses, and they both are quite successful, particularly Saul. the house that Saul lives in is still standing. There's a lot of debate as to exactly which house he was in, but the best I can infer is that it was 829 River Drive. And next to it, they owned an acreage behind, if you will, these houses. And next to it, this tiny little thing that looks like a garage, but it doesn't have a garage entrance, is the basic synagogue of Kenora. He hived off part of his land and donated it. Now there's an aerial view. There's Lawrenson's Creek. Those of you who know Kenora a little bit, it runs into Lake of the Woods. So River Drive used to be called Brewery Drive because there was a brewery at the end of it. And that's Dader's house. The little tiny synagogue is hidden by the foliage because it's a summer view. So Saul had 3 sons, were born and grew up in Kenora, Philip, Zen, and Morley. There's a couple of Zens here. There's Zen on his 13th birthday at his bar mitzvah time, looking pretty cool. And there's his younger brother, Morley, the baby of the family, at his bar mitzvah. Now, Morley is still alive at 91 in Toronto. I connected with his daughter, who says that Morley's memory is sadly fairly significantly impaired, and he couldn't tell his daughter whether he had his bar mitzvah possibly in Kenora or possibly in Winnipeg. He told her that the Kenora shul was so basic that possibly it wasn't there, but he then changed his mind, and she said that he thought maybe he did have his bar mitzvah there. Now, I did score something pretty cool, I think, in that I discovered the Ontario Jewish Archives had the actual minutes of the Kenora Jewish community, verbatim, 26 pages they sent me. And so the first minutes are September 12, 1941, and you can probably read. The suggestions laid before the meeting was that the east half of the lot owned by Mr. Saul Dader be deeded for the synagogue, and Izzy Lenitsky and Izzy Katz were the trustees. Now, there's some more. The fundraising that went on, they actually, at that meeting, they raised $405. That's a lot of money in 1940-41. And Mrs. Silverman exemplified the spirit and enthusiasm of all by paying immediately a contribution of $50, which was warmly applauded, I'm sure. Now, there's a lot of fun things that I found out from reading these minutes that have talked about Saul Dader's property. They looked high and low for Torah scrolls. The Torah is, of course, the holy 5 books of Moses, writ out in Hebrew calligraphy on parchment. Now, every synagogue has to have Torah scrolls. They looked high and low, and they reached out to Hirsch, Saskatchewan. They sent them, another agricultural community, they sent them a Torah scroll. It was in such bad shape they couldn't use it. They had to return it. Eventually, they were able to purchase Torah scrolls from the Birds Hill community. Maybe they had extra, I'm not sure. $175. That's quite a bit, considering that the synagogue was built for less than $1,000. And it was very, very basic, because subsequent to the finishing of the construction, they decided to put a floor in, a chimney, and an outhouse. So that tells you a little bit. Pretty rough. Other tidbits that I found interesting. Mrs. Gurevich, who, remember, is the widow Genendel, the widow Gurevich, said, I will donate, $50 immediately to the synagogue if the men stop gambling and playing cards in the synagogue. They had to hold a special meeting to decide whether to accept her offer or not. They did accept it, and the gambling, I presume, ceased. Sounds familiar in some ways to what goes on these days. Okay, now the Plosker era, as they got older and retired from running, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you, I skipped a bit. The Daders had land parallel to what is now the Trans-Canada Highway. They were fortuitous in where they located, and they put some tourist cabins on the land, and it was Daders' cabins. It also served as overflow when some of their family flocked out to visit in the summer from Birds Hill. Now, in a car trip into the States in the late 20s, they discovered the phenomenon of the motor hotel. North Americans were whipping around in their jalopies and needed places to stay in smaller towns. they came back and the light bulb went on in their heads, and they built the Daters Motel and cabins. And they ran that motel very, very successfully. And so much so that it was their main living. They may have had other businesses, but that was a big one. And when they got older and were ready to retire, Sandra Plosker and Irvin Ozzie Plosker, who I personally knew, moved from Winnipeg to Kenora in 1957 to help with the motel. They stayed 42 years in Kenora. They had both their children there, Rhea and Shane. Some of you may know. Shane is a very successful fertility doctor somewhere, I believe, in Florida, who I've communicated with about this project. Yeah, the Ploskers retired in 1999 and to move back to Winnipeg. They put the Ploskers, it was still called the Daters Hotel in '67, but the Ploskers were running it. They renovated, they put in the first outdoor pool in Northwest Ontario, subsequently the first indoor pool. Now the Travelodge, I don't know who owns it, but they need a new sign maker. Instead of now hiring, there's no hiring. And for their special, the Beak Fast is, of course, for birds. It's special for birds, I would think. Now, I'm going to show you quickly, before we get back to an amazing presentation that Braden has to show you. Remember the other, I didn't mention, there's another Ganendal dater, the niece to Ganendal, Aunt Ganendal, was a Ganendal dater. I believe she went by Gertie. Some of the people here may be able to correct me on that. She married a Lazar. This is son Ed in 1940 at Camp Shiloh, and I'm now going to defer back to Braden. Where is he? Oh, that's a good place to be.
Okay, so some foreshadowing here. But at the same time, the synagogue in Kenora was just getting started. The Second World War was in full swing. At the time, there was fighting in North Africa, as well as on the oceans and in the air. British and Commonwealth troops were taking prisoners, as we see here. Because of the threat of the German invasion of the British Isles, the decision was made to ship all German POWs to other parts of the Commonwealth, including Canada. The last thing they needed, they being the Allies, the last thing they needed was a German invasion discovering POW camps full of trained soldiers, sailors, and airmen. So, get them out of the UK. German POWs were sent through the Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal, into the Indian Ocean, across the Pacific, through the Panama Canal, unloading in New York City, and then they took the train to Alberta. So a bit of a circuitous route, certainly. The large camps were in Lethbridge and Medicine Hat. So we can see here the large camps. Both of these camps held in excess of 10,000 POWs. Very, very large. One such POW was a fellow named Hans Lieberworth. He was drafted at 18 and was attached to the Africa Corps. We can see here by his mugshot, he was taken prisoner in March of 1942. He surrendered outside of Tobruk and was sent via that route across the Indian Ocean to Alberta. So, Canada in 1942-43 was facing a manpower crisis. There was more jobs than people to work them. In Western Canada, Canadian farmers were having trouble harvesting their crops. In Kenora and in most of Western Canada, there was a crisis of firewood. Coal was being diverted for the war effort, and wood was taking its place. The problem was there was no one to cut the trees. Now, this image that you see here is an image of Kenora in the wintertime. This is actually from 1921. Some of you may recall at the top of Matheson Street there was a large water tower up until a few years ago. This was taken by a young fellow. He was 14 years old. His name was Eric Panter, and he climbed up the water tower and took some photos, much to the chagrin of his mother. But you can see a downtown Kenora, and certainly in need of heating. There we go. So, the solution, according to the Canadian government, was to put German POWs, the same that were in Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, to work. This is to say that according to the Geneva Convention, you are allowed to offer POWs the opportunity to volunteer to work as long as it didn't contribute to the war effort. So you couldn't, according to the Geneva Convention, have them making ammunition or shells or these sorts of things. Over 10,000 POWs in Alberta alone, as I said. You can expect or you can understand why some took the opportunity instead of being stuck in Lethbridge. On Lake of the Woods, German POWs were allowed to volunteer at remote lumber camps. There was actually 5 camps on the lake. You can see there's 4 here. At the very top of the map, that's where Kenora is. So the very top, that's Kenora, and then sort of going down the lake. There was a 5th camp at the south end of the lake at Alfred Inlet. Camp 60 on the right-hand side of the map, that actually wasn't on Lake of the Woods, it was on Berry Lake. If there's any canoers here, you may be familiar with Berry Lake, down towards Nestor Falls. The 2 closest to Kenora were Camp 61 and Camp 52. Camp 52 was formerly called Red Cliff Bay. It is now very creatively called POW Bay. The conditions were primitive. There was no fences. On the right-hand side of the image here, you can see the classic blue uniform with the red dot on the back. The red dot was meant to be a target in case of escape. The guards who were veterans or locals from the Veterans Guard advised German POWs that they shouldn't run away because if they were, they would be eaten by bears. There were a few escape attempts, including trying to hotwire a truck, which failed, and all the accomplices were sent back to Alberta. And indeed, 2 did try to attempt to escape on foot. Unfortunately, their bodies were found the next spring, and yes, they had been partially eaten by a bear, although it was likely after they had passed. So the bear was more of an afterthought, indeed. Who turns down a meal, after all? The POWs were tasked with cutting a cord of wood per man per day. A cord of wood is 4 feet wide by 4 feet high by 8 feet long. You could do the work after you knew what you were doing in about 4.5 or 5 hours. There was no chainsaws. It was hand saws and axes. Certainly difficult work. The work was mostly done in the wintertime because it made transporting the pulpwood, the lumber, much easier. Then you can stack it up on the ice. When the ice melts, you lasso it into a big log boom, and then you could tow it to where you wanted to tow it on the lake. The camps were fairly simple, not luxurious, certainly. Classic tar paper shacks, pretty standard for Lake of the Woods lumber camps. There was generally 3 POW bunkhouses, a bunkhouse for the Veterans Guard, cabin and office for the boss, canteen, doctor's shack, stables, mess hall, recreation hall. The Canadian Department of Labor inspected the camps monthly to make sure they adhered to the terms of the Geneva Convention. It was not all fun and games, as you might expect. An Austrian doctor, an anti-Nazi, Dr. Wilhelm Gross, provided medical care to the prisoners. He was also working with Canadian military intelligence to investigate and report any pro-Nazi activities in the camp. The influence varied from camp to camp, with some being very politically active, others maintaining military discipline without much of the political leanings, and still others were very explicitly anti-Nazi. It really depended on who the NCOs and officers were at the camps. Eventually, any extremists, hardcore Nazis, true believers, troublemakers were identified, and they were transferred back to the larger camps in Alberta. This resolved most of the issues, and the guards and Canadian military establishment made it very clear that this was a privilege, not a right, and you leave all your silly thoughts at the door. Dr. Wilhelm Gross, interestingly enough, after the Second World War had just completed, was used, had a similar task in Europe where he was providing medical care and also reporting to military intelligence and gleaning intelligence from former Nazi officers. So Wilhelm Gross certainly led an interesting life. During the exhibit last summer, we had an exhibit on this last summer at the museum, and I think Ray came in to see it. That might have been what started this conversation. I think it was. But we had a fellow come into the museum, quite advanced in age. Turned out he was 98 years old. Ray Renard came in and he said, "You guys have it all wrong." And I said, "Oh, okay, I know where this is going." And he said, "You have it wrong because I was there and I know what happened." It turns out, Ray, he was teasing. He was teasing us, but he had been there at Camp Number 61 in Oak Bay as a 16-year-old in 1943. The funny thing is, Ray did not know it was a POW camp when he applied for the job. He just saw that they needed a camp assistant, and he was off for the summer. He figured that seems like a decent gig. I can make a few bucks. And when he ended up at the camp, he was dropped off with his big duffel bag and recognized that the people at the camp weren't speaking English. They weren't speaking French or Polish or Ukrainian. He's a good Canadian kid, so from Kenora, so he kind of could clock whether it was French or Polish or Ukrainian, but no, this was German. When he reported to the camp boss, he was informed they were actually German POWs, and he was quite shocked, as you might expect. This is the dining hall at one of the camps. We don't know which one, but it is one of the POW camps. The sign above the door is written in German, "You may not go into the kitchen." So good advice there. And I'm told they also followed classic lumber camp rules, which meant no speaking at the table, which was officially to make sure that the cookies, the camp's chef's assistants, could clean up quickly, but I suspect it, in other labor camps other than POW camps, had something to do with suppressing union talk as well. But in any case, per the Geneva Convention, the POWs were paid. They were paid 50 cents a day. Not that they were issued hard currency, but rather they could spend it at the camp canteen, which is what you see here. They had things like cigarettes, pop, toiletries, laundry, soap, that sort of thing. Now, that is not to say that they didn't, I'm getting ahead of myself. Generally, Saturdays were a half day, Sundays were a day off. Prisoners entertained themselves in the usual ways of the lake, swimming, as you can see our bare-bottomed friend here, building model boats. One enterprising POW even was melting down lead fishing weights and casting them into authentic iron crosses, which he then traded to the guards to sell in Kenora. With that cash, they would actually purchase things from the Eaton's catalog. You see the two fellows on the right here. This is cowboy gear that they had purchased from the Eaton's catalog. They figured if they were going to be in Canada, they should be true Canadian cowboys. So, they built kayaks and canoes. After a drowning accident, many purchased life jackets. Generally, the POWs were allowed to go as far as the guards can see, usually a mile or two in each direction. At one point, a POW did escape via a canoe to Warroad, where he was picked up by the Minnesota State Troopers. He later claimed he only wanted a break from cutting wood, so he just wanted a little vacation. Interactions with locals was strictly discouraged. Trips to town rarely happened, but did happen from time to time. In one fairly well-known story in Kenora, and I say fairly well-known because it's been relayed to me by more than one person independently, a guard brought a prisoner into Kenora for a dental procedure. While the POW was at the dentist, the guard was having a drink, maybe two, at the tavern next door. And after a few hours, the guard went to go collect the POW, but unfortunately was so drunk he couldn't stand up. The POW lifted the guard, slung the guard's rifle over his back, and helped him into the boat. As he was arriving at the camp at Red Cliff Bay, he realized having the guard passed out in the boat with the rifle over his shoulder was probably a pretty bad look. And so he switched everything and kind of got everything, and they floated in, and all was well. Luckily, the guard was sort of well known for this sort of thing, so no harm, no foul. By late 1944 and into 1945, the Veterans Guard was stood down, and young active duty soldiers began guarding the POW camps. You can see here 3 good-looking kids from Canada here, including on the left-hand side, Alvin Zimmerman of Kenora. This is from the Zimmerman collection. that was donated to the museum a few years ago by his children. So the POWs were in Canada from 1943 until 1946. Well after VE Day in Canada, or in Europe rather, which was May 1945, the last of the camps were winding down by mid-1946. In the years after the war, some POWs actually did come back to Canada, including Hans Lieberworth, who I mentioned before, who in 1976 came back and purchased a cottage in Sioux Narrows and lived there in the summertime until his death in the early 2000s. So, I'm now going to hand it back to Ray.
Wow. That's an amazing story, a hard act to follow. I've changed my thing a little bit. I'm going to show Ed Lazar, Ed's war. Well, Ed was his mother was a dater, and he served in the military for Canada in the war years. This is taken at Camp Shiloh. And he was tapped on the shoulder to help guard POWs in various locations across Western Canada, possibly even the East. But eventually he was posted, amazingly, to the Kenora camps that Braden has just profiled. And it was the best 2 or 3 years of his life, he reported to his family, because in his time off he could enjoy Kenora, and he also connected with his dater, his uncles, and all of his cousins. So he had a fortunate posting for him. Now, I'm going to go, I've changed my mind a little bit here, if I can. That's the end, but okay. Because I wanted to show the irony. There's a lot of the experience of those POWs that I can't help but thinking that it's pretty much like a summer camp. They were treated pretty well. Well, here's a bunch of Jewish young men. They're as a sector, they're all married to Ratners, who had a logging concession owned by a Jewish businessman, Frank Ratner, in Wild Lake, way up in northwest Ontario, about 40 kilometers northeast of Kenora. And I just thought it was the ultimate irony that these 4 people are on the diving board, just like that young German soldier, at exactly the same era, the same time. And I know some people in the audience know this is Jack Sector, and there's a Karlinski here, I believe that fellow. And there's a guy named Mobby, right? And Nathan? Okay, all right. Thank you, Claire, and thank you. But I just thought that was extremely, what's not fortuitous, ironic. Yeah. Okay, back to my story. We're going to profile now the Katzes of Kenora, the great Katz saga. Zelig and Minnie were the patriarch and matriarch, but we're going to focus on Abraham, Bernice, and son Zen. Abraham arrived in Kenora in 1905. He was involved in the raw fur trade.
Start the slideshow again here.
Oh, I haven't started the slideshow? Okie doke, well that's important. You mean it wasn't moving? Could you see anything? Okay, I'm a rookie at this, thanks. So he arrives in 1905, and he's involved, of course, in the raw fur trade with the indigenous, also selling blueberries and fish. Apparently, legend has it, more than legend, that he marketed his furs from a caboose on the CPR line from Kenora all the way to Montreal. I don't know how he did that, but now, in 1912, he purchased the Commercial Hotel. One of the grand old hotels of Kenora is built in 1889 by 2 guys, McVeigh and Shaw, and there's a picture of what it looked like back in the day. Now, he bought it mostly, he thought, as an investment, but he and his family ended up running that hotel or its replacement for about 100 years, possibly actually a little more. They were in the hotel business big time. Now, there's Abe and the nephew, Izzy Swanky Katz. He had a very unusual nickname. Abe is seated, Ellen Katz and Izzy Lenitsky, who, again, Joey is here. He can explain the connections. I don't understand the theory of relatives too well. But so upon Abe's passing, Bernice managed the hotel from 48 to 52 on her own. But then son Zen's era begins, and Zen was working for a jeweler in Winnipeg at that time, a fairly well-known guy named Ben Moss. But he came back to Kenora to help his mom out. And he was a natural hotelier and restaurateur. I imagine a guy who was extremely gregarious. He could work the front of the room really well. He was really into producing really good quality food. And he did a big reno of the hotel, or the old hotel, I guess, was knocked down. And in 54, 55, he reopened as the Kenwood. Now, he married a nice gal from West Kildona, an innocent girl named Sharon, and brought her out to Kenora. And she recounts some harrowing times there, because they lived up in the old hotel, and then eventually in the third floor of the Kenwood. Now, she remembers that there were no private washrooms. They mostly had ancient pensioners for hotel residents. Initially, there was no liquor license, so they ran the hotel with only a Coke machine. She raised 4 kids initially while living in the hotel. There was Joey, Richard, Alan, and Barbara. Zen pulled off a massive, he pulled off a massive renewal of the hotel, and he began to focus more on the food side of the business. Eventually, the Kenwood became famous throughout Northwest Ontario, even to Winnipeg, for its steaks, its fish, shrimp cocktail. It was felt to be the best. And actually, they had a bar, the Brass Rail Lounge, they had karaoke, they had the whole 9 yards. It was very, very successful. And even after the hotel business fell off, the Kenwood restaurant carried on and was quite a focus. All the businessmen of Kenora would meet there to schmooze and get together with Zen. Now, all 4 children actually played a big role as in forced labor. They prepped food, they washed dishes, they bussed tables, they did the whole thing. But Joey inherited the mantle of carrying on the hotel. He focused carried on with developing the food and moved into catering, actually. He tells me he catered some very big, important events like the Stanley Cup celebration in 1995 when Mike Richards, who played for the LA Kings, came home that summer with the Stanley Cup. He also had a nice connection with a billionaire on the lake, J.B. Nethercutt of the Merle Norman cosmetic empire, and he catered some nice events for him. The restaurant closed, sadly, in 2006, and the building was sold, was eventually demolished in 2017, so there is no more Kenwood at Chipman and First Avenue, sadly. But at this site, my understanding is, and maybe Joey can confirm it, that there is going to be some attempt at an Aboriginal Health Access Center being built on that very site. And Joey carries on in Kenora. He slid over from hotel and food to being a successful real estate agent. Okay, that's the cat saga. Oh, I do want to show you this is their menu where they highlight their Chateaubriand, very rare only, and their double New York. And Joey will have to tell us how do you Oscarize any steak? I don't know if that's got to do with shrimp or whatever. Okay. Just back to Patriarch A, very briefly, in addition to running several businesses, he was able to get 2 nephews and his sister out of Lithuania well before World War II. These people, including Izzy Katz, the guy with the nickname Swanky, became a very successful fish proprietor, and the Katz Fish Market shipped fresh fish all over North America. The other nephew, Izzy Lenitsky, ran a very successful clothing store. 2nd Avenue, and he was very prominent in the Jewish community through the 30s and 40s. So here's a shot of, in the 1920s, the fish market down on the docks of downtown Kenora. Quite a big operation it was. And somebody recalled that they're an older person, I guess, that his dad and Katz conferred a lot on fish days with dealers and each other to achieve the best price for the fishermen. Mr. Katz and my father had a very amicable relationship. So now we're going on to the Schrag saga. Now, the Schrags have an island on Lake of the Woods. Still, they don't own it anymore, but it's called Schrag's Island. And there again is JJ. I just like the picture, so I go back to it. But JJ, actually, it's his eldest child, Oshus, which is derived from Yehoshua. It's a name I've never encountered before. Oshus comes over along with his nephew Bernard, and they arrive in Winnipeg in 1882 as part of that big mass migration. Bernard goes on to establish Shrag Metals, and I believe there's still vestiges of that building in the Point Douglas area. But it's Oshus I'm going to profile. Now, this fellow was a remarkable person. He established the whole Kenora thing. He was the scion of the family Shrag. He came to Kenora in 1893, and before that, when he arrived in Canada at age 17, he was purported to speak or understand up to 7 languages, none of them English. So he got jobs. Before he came to Kenora, he worked as a stoker on a Red River paddle wheel boat. He worked in rural Manitoba and Morden. He worked for the Hudson Bay Company, and a customer gave him a Bible from which he learned English, apparently. So he comes out to Kenora in 1893, and I just want to show you a snapshot, and Braden's referred to it too very well, snapshot of Kenora in 1893. It's an amazing picture of 2 Indigenous kids. Behind them are all these big baskets filled with blueberries. Now, Kenora in 1893, you could buy a pound of butter for 22 cents, a dozen eggs for 17 cents, 20 pounds of sugar for $1. The total blueberry shipments from Kenora in that era was 89 tons, worth $16,000. And by 1890, there were 20 working gold mines in Lake of the Woods area, making Kenora, well, it was Rat Portage at that time, one of the roughest, rowdiest towns of its size in Canada. Had quite a reputation. So young Oshus, extremely creative, industrious, athletic, resilient. I told you his jobs, but he learned English. He was befriended by a Scotsman who Braden feels is Mr. Matheson, right? Who had a successful clothing store. Took him under his wing and convinced him to change his name to Alexander. So now he was Alex Shrag, I'm sorry. And he, apparently his English had a mild Scottish brogue from there then on. So he established Shrag's clothing and dry goods store. And he really, again, was very successful. There's a picture, I guess in the teens or the 20s. There's the vertical thing is the Shrag's sign, and the horizontal says the working man's clothing store. Yep. There's the exterior. There's the interior with all the derbies on the left. The fellows with the mustachioed fellows. He served a lot of the customers were miners and or railway workers. As Braden said, the CPR was just being finished. There was a lot of work being done on twinning the tracks. There's Alex. He married Elizabeth Ripstein, known as Bessie, from Winnipeg. So it's one of the Ripsteins. And there's Bessie later in life in LA, actually, in 1937. They had 4 children. They were born and raised in Kenora. The oldest one with a wooden gun, Gerald, there's Gertrude, Clarence, and Verna. Gerald became a dentist. Gertrude married A.B. Koppelman from Winnipeg, who came out as the son-in-law and took over the Shrag store. Clarence was a successful commercial artist in Toronto. I'm not sure what Verna did. And there they are in their whites, a little bit older on the dock in the summer. They lived quite a nice lifestyle in Kenora, frankly. There's Alex Shrag, and he's surrounded by this serious-looking athletes who are all baseball players, and they obviously have won some kind of trophy. This is 1902 or 03, several of these players actually, they were dual sport athletes. They played hockey also. They played on the famous Kenora Thistles team that won the Stanley Cup in 1907. And, pardon?
That's the Shrag Cup.
He says that's the Shrag Cup. He was extremely involved in community organizations. He was on the Board of Trade. He was a town councillor. He was involved with the Masons, the Oddfellows, the Rotary, and very involved in outdoor sports. Hockey, rowing, baseball. Evidently, he was described as a very graceful skater, and he established a dog derby, which went on to take the name Shrag's Dog Derby. I don't know exactly what a dog derby is. I don't have, unfortunately, any photos that we can find at this point. He donated the land for the Boy Scouts. For health reasons, he and his wife moved to LA in 1929, and he passed there in 1933. Okay, that's the Shrag Saga. One last thing. This is their wooden, they had 2 boats. This is their big wooden mahogany launch called the Verna S, after the baby of the family, built by the Stone Boat Company, famous boat builders in Kenora. And he would take important people around on Lake of the Woods when they visited. Reputedly, he took, or somebody used this launch to take around none other than the Prince of Wales, who visited Kenora and Moonachie in 1919. So he was quite a mover and shaker. Now, the last thing I'm going to do on the Shrags is really not directly about the Shrags, actually. And I wish there were some Indigenous people here. Maybe there are, I don't know, First Nations people, because it's a very sad thing. And in terms of reconciliation, it's so important that we know these things happened. Apparently, and I got this information from both Braden and from a fellow named Leo Waisberg, who was an ethnohistorian, and he worked for Indigenous groups. And he sent me this, this image on Shrag stationery in 1911. Several chiefs, Indigenous chiefs from the area, wrote this sad letter to the inspector of Indian agencies. Oh, where is my... Basically, they say, if you can read it, do you know that we believe in the great medicine? Now we want to inform you that our chief and another man are in jail for the grand medicine affair. It is very strange that white people want to stop our belief. We wish you to ask the Governor General if it is in your desire to stop our belief. And they ask for a quick reply. Gosh knows if that ever happened. I don't know what happened to those chiefs who were arrested. But the interesting thing is it's on Shrag stationery. There's the Shrag logo with the miner with his pick. So that I have to believe that the Shrag family and or Shrag staff facilitated and helped the Indigenous people in creating this letter. It's a very interesting bit of history there. Okay, last family, one of the last families is Jack and Rose Winkler, who arrived in Kenora in 1925 and established Styles Clothing Shop at 12 Main Street in the Singer Block. Now, the Singer Block apparently was built by a guy named Dave or David Singer, no relative of mine, but I couldn't find any evidence that he ever lived in Kenora, and I wasn't even certain that he was from Winnipeg. So if any one of you folks can give me more information on this guy, Dave Singer, who built this building. So it was a successful business. Jack was known for giving clothes out during the Depression to the needy in those lean years. There's a young Kelvin Winkler, his son, on the steps of his dad's store. Sadly, his dad died when Kelvin was only 19, and he had to take the business over, and which he did again. He turned out to be an extremely industrious, entrepreneurial fellow who was very successful. They are summering apparently at Black Sturgeon Lake, which is where our cottage happens to be, with one of his children. And there's the building back in the 20s style, the Singer Block, basically. And that same building is still extant. You can see the bones of the building, the stonework there, identical, and it's used by various agencies now. It's opposite the Kenora City Hall, 12 Main Street. Now, he had many businesses, Kelvin Winkler did, 6 or 7 at one time. He had businesses in Nestor Falls and Sioux Narrows, and several in Kenora. He even had an ice cream stand in the basement of the auspicious grand old Keinehorathe Hotel, built in 1910 as one of the most fantastical hotels in Northwest Ontario. Still standing to this day on very, very lean. It's really a mess. But there's still people who stay in the lower floors, and if anyone has a few extra $1 million, maybe they can. It is deemed to be a heritage building, and he achieved an awful lot for Kenora. Kelvin Winkler did. He became town councillor. He ran once unsuccessfully. He won, though, in 1977. They recognized his talent, and he became mayor in 1980. And he served as the longest reigning mayor in Kenora from 1980 to 1997, and again from 1994, and from 1997 to the year 2000. You know, what he did in the 80s, Barb and I were already in Kenora, and we knew there was a Mayor Winkler. I thought, well, he's probably Mennonite, Morden, Winkler, Altona. What did I know? What I knew wasn't very much. What he achieved terrific stuff for the redevelopment of the Kenora harbor front. And here he is in a fake face-off with his MPP counterpart, Leo Bernier. And there they are celebrating the opening of the harbor front, which after he passed was renamed the Winkler Harbor Front to this day. And to cap it all off is the amazing White Cap Pavilion, which was built at the site of the harbor front, and which is a great place for events, symphonies, rock concerts, and a wonderful market on Wednesdays, I believe. Now I'm not going to talk about the Ratners. I've gone on pretty long here. I am just going to give you this last thing. I don't think Shelley Lippman's in the audience, but the story here is that Joachim Kakagamak is one of these woodland artists. He was mentored by Norval Morrisseau. He grew up in Sandy Bay, way 300 kilometers north of Kenora, but he was befriended by Dr. Jerry Lippman, who bought a dental practice in Kenora in 1955, worked there for 25 years, had a great eye for art, and he would go up into the far north to serve the dental needs on the reserves. He met and befriended Joachim Kakagamak, and he helped him out. He bought a lot of his early paintings and continued to support him and amassed quite a collection of Kakagamaks. And tragically, Joachim died in his early 40s. He and a friend noticed some skidooers in this time of year, I guess, in trouble on the ice, and he went out and he fell through the ice and drowned at 42. But he has literally hundreds of works. When Dr. Lippman passed, his daughter Shelley donated several of the nice works to the Douglas Family Art Center, which is part of the Kenora Museum. You should all go and visit. And I was fortunate enough at a showing of the Kakagamaks that the Lippman family was selling. I was fortunate enough to purchase this wonderful painting, The Medicine Man. And that is the end of my story. Oh, I meant to thank a bunch of people, and I'm going to start in no particular order, but the acknowledgements, except the numero uno is my wife, who had to put up with all of my craziness. Yes, you bet. And you might, if you encounter any cookies, it's because of her. But also Rosalie Lazar, and from the Jewish Heritage Center, Stan Carboni, Andrew Morrison, Professor Dan Stone, Belle Januski, Braden Murray from the Muse, of course, Peter Kirby from Kenora, Ontario Jewish Archives, Deborah Mayer, Rhonda Dater, Joey Katz, Doug Keshen, Janet Gould, Heather Cram, Ruby Donner, the late Udi Hentelef, Lloyd Sector, Rena Elbaz, Mark Winkler, Arnold Zeal, Lawrence Winkler, Leo Weisberg, Bruce Sarvet, and others, ich vergessen, which means I forget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ray. Thank you very much, Braden, for this wonderful presentation, the thorough covering of these subjects. I'll indulge myself by saying that they link up in a funny way with various programs that we'll be running in the future. We do have one in September called Beyond the Perimeter, which will discuss smaller Jewish communities in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, featuring former people who grew up there. And you may not know, but German Jews who got to Britain in various ways were generally arrested when World War II broke out, and many of them were shipped to Canada, others to Australia. As far as I know, and I've checked this with Braden, there don't seem to have been any who were sent to the Kenora area. They were arrested earlier and incarcerated much further east. And the Jewish Canada, along with Britain, discovered, usually by 1942 or 1943, that the German Jews were not dangerous, even though they had been German citizens, and they were released. So we'll be talking a bit about that. That's unscheduled. But let's get back to these wonderful presentation. Stan, you have a microphone, yes? So if you have questions or comments, please raise your hand, and Stan will come around with it. Thanks for turning the lights on, makes it much easier.
Okay, if you don't mind passing.
Well, the comment I have is how much I enjoyed both your presentations. The question I have, do you have any idea how many of the POWs eventually ended up in Canada as immigrants?
That's something that we've been working on. You may recall last year when there was some controversy about whether they were to release the records of Germans that came to Canada after 1952, and the decision was made to not do that, unfortunately, because it really prevents that research. So the Canadian government knows, but they won't tell us. So we know there were a few. Well, we don't know either, unfortunately. There was a few. Certainly Hans Lieberworth is one. There was another fellow named Gunter Melange, who was a cabinet maker, also in Soon-Arrows. So there was a few, certainly. But we don't know for sure. And I know there's a fellow who does research on POWs on Lake of the Woods, who is chomping at the bit to get at those records, and was very disappointed when they were not released last year. So,
My name is Mel Hornstein. I have 2 points of history with living in Kenora. One is I was at BB Camp in 1955-56, and it connects well with this last question. There was a fellow at BB Camp for quite a number of years, all the way to the late 60s, whose name was Gus Anders. Gus was always referred to as Gus, and you took a breath because he was tough. He ran the physical side of Town Island. He ran the generator, he shoveled ditches, and he did everything in between, including driving the launch, which might have been one of the inheritances from the Schrag family. I think, he never talked about it, I think he was in the POW Camp 60 on Oak Island. He had a upholstery shop here in Winnipeg and was the maintenance guy at BB Camp for decades. When I asked him once where he was from, he told me, in connection today, Medicine Hat. And I knew he wasn't telling me a whole story. He was the only guy on Town Island who had a rifle. I killed with him, with me watching him, a bear at the garbage pit. And he had, while we were waiting for the moment, a whole number of stories, some of which had to do with down on Oak Island.
Mel, did he have a German accent?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Oh,
that doesn't
yes.
mean, yeah.
And
what was his last name again?
the words I would give you is
He wants his last, Braden wants
Anders. Anders, as far as I know.
Anders.
Anders.
Sounds more
And
Scandinavian.
well, you could read into it what you want, but and I don't know for sure what his full or previous name might have been.
Great.
But what I do know, when he was at the table and he said, "Pass the butter," that you knew that you were going to pass the butter.
You know, one
So-
thing, I was going to laterally reference the early years of BB Camp, which you could do very well, Mel, but the Winkler, Lawrence Winkler, one of the son of Kelvin, remembers, and you would be able to confirm this, that Kenora was very loath to sell to BB Camp the land that they leased on Town Island, and they didn't do it till 2014,
Well,
I think.
the-
Well, let me finish, Mel. So he remembers a plebiscite in 1961, a citywide plebiscite to see whether the populace of Kenora would agree for the town to sell the land that BB Camp had already been on for some time to the BB Camp. And the decision was they refused. There was a call-in radio show where they were discussing the plebiscite, and Lawrence Winkler remembers his father being shocked at the amount of anti-Semitism that was expressed.
My second comment, definitely, it ends with what you've just said. I will tell you from the point of view of B'nai B'rith Camp, in a much better position today. But back in all those years, the Winklers, the Katzes, had it not been for them, there would be no BB Camp on Town Island.
Yeah, thank you.
They made a significant contribution behind the scenes.
Yeah, and the
And they
Plosker-
were
yeah.
hidden
Yep, yep.
because, without question, the population was not welcoming of Jewish people, notwithstanding some of the singular and outstanding contributions that were made to the town. My family goes back to 1922. They established a branch of my family, my mother's family, Donner's Furniture. They moved in 1944 to Vancouver because in January of 1944, a fur store, a raw fur store, burned up 2 doors away from the Donner's Furniture store and destroyed it. They ended up in Vancouver because you might be surprised to know the weather in Vancouver is a lot better. They had a long-standing hotels and furniture stores in Vancouver, very good family.
Thank you.
In Kenora, what they left behind were numerous memories, some of which focus on the area, or one of the areas around Rabbit Lake. Rabbit Lake is just north of town. It's inside the bypass now. And they had, although they lived above the store on Main Street, they had, amongst others, a village, a Jewish village that was on Rabbit Lake. It was their summer home. My mother spent her summers there because it was Kenora, and it was one of the best places to go. So, all told, you have done an excellent job in tying in to the reality of Jewish people across the prairies making significant contributions.
Thank you, Mel. I hated to say this, but the Donners were included in my presentation. I know, but I didn't have time. But thank you, because you did my presentation for me. The one quick thing that I can tell you, and you would know the story, two of Fanny's sons jumped on the CPR after not only the store, the place they lived above it, everything, they lost everything. They jumped on the train. They said, we're going as far as we can. They got to Vancouver. They come out in their January fur coats from the Kenora winter, and they encounter this amazing weather. They go to the White Spot, apparently, have a couple of burgers. They ended up buying a furniture store in Kenora and coming back and telling Mom, guess what? We're moving to Vancouver, right?
The Vancouver Jewish Heritage Organization has a magazine called The Scribe. 2013, the whole story of the furniture business is there, and the Donner's story is all in
Featured.
there as well.
Thank you.
Ray, my name is, I'm over here, right by Mel. I won't speak as long. Sorry, Mel. We've been friends a long time. My name is Isle Slotin. My mother was Ripstein. And my grandmother, on my mother's side, was Bessie Ripstein.
Oh, wow.
So I just thought I'd tell you that. And my mother, I remember her talking about going out to visit the Donners. That's what I remember. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Other? Stan?
Thank you. I'm Deborah Mayer. Deborah Dater was my maiden name, and my grandfather was Saul Dater. My dad, Zenith, and his two brothers, Morley and Phil, grew up in Kenora. I was born in Kenora myself. My parents made the decision just before my 4th birthday to move into Winnipeg because Mom wanted me to go to Jewish school, which of course wasn't available in Kenora. I've spent my life having people say to me, there were no Jews in Kenora. And so it's really quite remarkable to have the stories shared this way, and kind of the oral history, I guess, things that I heard from my grandparents. That little synagogue was on the property of my grandparents' home, which is still there. And my grandmother would tell me a story that because she was right next door, all the children who would get hungry on Yom Kippur would come over to the house, and my Baba would have cinnamon buns ready to feed the children so that they could last long enough, to go home with their parents to break the fast. So that's just one of the stories I remember. One other one, quick. Before Dater's Motel was built, as Ray said, there were cabins on the property. At that time, many people would come out to do their honeymoon in Kenora. My dad would tell me that when the cabins were overflowing, my grandmother would continue to take paying customers and turn the boys out of their beds so that people could have a place to sleep. So there were many times where my dad and his brothers ended up sleeping on the floor because someone was in their bed. So anyway, thank you very much for the chance to hear all of this today.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one or two more before we adjourn for coffee. Is there any?
I'm just going to get I hope there's some more questions. I just want people to, again, and when I had this idea, it was Stan Carboni who said, well, maybe there could be a co-presentation, because he'd heard about the POW, fantastic exhibit in the Muse. And I said, well, I don't think the director is going to want to take those big, huge posters all the way to Winnipeg, which was not feasible. But I will say that the museum in Kenora is a gem that any of you people who go out to that area should visit. There you go. Free marketing.
Well, let me tell you about things that will be coming up, sponsored by the Heritage Center. Our big event of the year is the Caney Distinguished Lecture on Wednesday, May 7th at 7 p.m., back after the renovations at Shara Zedek. The speaker, as you probably may have seen, is Yair Rosenberg, a writer for Atlantic Magazine, and he will be talking about anti-Semitism, conspiracism, and populism. Tickets can be purchased from the Heritage Center directly, or you can check with our website. I'm told they should be available through Eventbrite, but I'm told that the website has had some problems. So if you want to try that and you have any problems, please contact the office or the website as quickly as possible, and don't waste your time. As I mentioned, in September 28th to be exact, at Temple Shalom, be a program Beyond the Perimeter about other small centers in Manitoba and one in Saskatchewan, presented by people who grew up there. A big event that will be sometime, I don't think we've scheduled yet, it probably, Stan, is it January most likely? Stan and the staff, the rest of the staff, have been working very hard for a very long time on a major exhibit on the contributions on women in the development of the Jewish community, especially in community organizations, sisterhoods, councils, and so on. So this will be an exhibit that will fill all the display cases along the walls and in the front there, the diagonal one when you come in. That's it for the immediate or the not so immediate. And thank you very much. Thank you very much, Braden and Ray, for this wonderful presentation. And there's coffee in the lobby outside. Oh, yes. This will be posted in a few days on our YouTube channel, along with other sessions that we've held in the past.